For some must push and some must pull as we go marching up the hill. So merrily on the way we go until we reach the valley. Oh.
The last part of it is what you're going to see tomorrow. And that is, I told the stake what President Hinckley told me, that not only did we have to get the temple work done and build the monuments, but we had to acquire the land, which was an impossible thing to do. Tomorrow when you see it, you might agree that it was impossible. We acquired part of the third largest ranch in the United States. We acquired 112,000 acres. That's pristine. It's the way the pioneers saw it. It's an unbelievable story all by itself. The acquisition of Rock Creek. I told the people of the stake, I said, as your stake president, I promise you that if we will finish this temple work, we will then become the stewards of not only the Willie but the Martin lands. The last temple ordinance was done, interestingly enough, for Captain James Gray Willie. He was the last one that needed an ordinance done. He wasn't sealed to his third wife. We did that ordinance on September 6th, 1992. And on September 10th, we owned Rock Creek. It was just a given that it was going to happen. President Hinckley, when he was here on August 15th of 1992, we took him first to Martin's Cove. And he told me then, as President Faust did earlier in July, he said, President Lorimer, get an easement across the Sun Ranch into Martin's Cove. He said, do that for the church. Then we went from there to the Willie Rescue Site, had the dedication there, went up over Rocky Ridge, and then took him onto Rock Creek. President Faust, when he was here in July, was like a little boy. He so wanted to go onto Rock Creek, but the landowner wouldn't let us take him on. I'll never forget that mental picture in my mind of President James E. Faust standing at that fence, wanting to go over to the monument, but not being able to. President Faust has been back many times since, but that day we couldn't take him there. August 15th came and the landowner softened his heart and let us take President Hinckley onto the property. We drove him in there. When we got there, we told him the stories about it and everything, and then he went back to get in the Suburban, and we have a tradition in our stake that we place little bouquets of flowers by different ones of the pioneers' names. And I'd pick 2 or 3 little flowers and put them down next to Bo Dio Mortensen's name. And I heard that voice, you know, it's so distinguishable. President Lorimer, you can't get away with that. I thought, oh, geez, what do I do? You know, I just put the flowers down. Here comes President Hinckley. And he's ripping flowers out of the ground. I mean, he didn't pick a few. He ripped a bouquet of flowers. I mean, big bouquet of flowers. And then he knelt down at that monument. And he placed those flowers next to Bo Dio's name. And with tears in his eyes, he stood up and he said, she's my friend too. Here's a little Danish girl who was traveling alone, who didn't understand the language, was 9 years old, was lost for 135 years. And a prophet of God knelt down and gave her a bouquet of flowers. Unbelievable experience. He then grabbed me by the arm and said, come with me. We walked down Rock Creek for a ways, and he said, I don't care what you have to pay. Buy this for the church. I went on September 10th and sat down on a rock with the man that owned it. We talked about the weather. We talked about cowboy stories. Finally, I said, Kenny, you need to sell this to the church. He said, yeah, I know, but you won't pay me enough. I said, we won't pay enough because you want too much. But I knew President Hinckley let me pay whatever I had to get it. I said, Kenny, you want way too much for this land. He said, no, I don't. It's a fair price. I said, it is not. I said, I'll make you a firm offer right now. He said, okay, what is it? I said, I will pay you 25% of what you want. He looked at me and he said, it's a deal. And we owned Rock Creek. It was that simple. But we had to first do the temple work. Once the temple work was done, then the Willie and the Martin people said, you know, if our story can help other people, and if the lands where we suffered so much can be of testimony building experience for others, we'll help you get the land. It was just as easy as that we got Rock Creek. Sun Ranch is a whole different episode, a whole different set of circumstances. Sun Ranch was owned by Tom de Beausoleil. He was a Frenchman, French-Canadian from, I can't remember where he's from, but he's Canadian descent anyway. And he just really liked the Sweetwater Valley. So he set up a homestead there and built his first cabin in 1873, I think it was, and began living there, married and had children. And the Sun family had been there ever since. It was the oldest water right west of the Mississippi held by one family. It was also the third largest ranch in the United States. It was 1,200,000 acres. The Suns would not allow people into Martin's Cove unless you just happened to know one of them, and then they would. I knew Dennis' son, who was the foreman on the ranch, and he would let me in there anytime I wanted to go and allowed us to build the monument. President Hinckley went in and dedicated it and met Bernard's son, who was the patriarch of the Sun family. Asked me to negotiate with Bernard an easement into Martin's Cove, as did President Faust. I spent the winter of 1993. We'd bought Rock Creek in 92, in the fall of 92, so I spent the whole winter of 1993 negotiating with the Suns to have an easement across the land into Martin's Cove. And I got it done. So I wrote President Hinckley and said, got it done, here's the deal. I never heard from him. So I thought, well, President Faust asked me, I'll write him. So I wrote President Faust, said, here's the deal. And I didn't hear from him. So I thought, well, maybe they don't want it anymore. You know, we're busy. We had, when you see Rock Creek tomorrow, we had, in the summer of 1994, we had more fun than you should have. Or 93, we were up there with D9 cats and all kinds of junk. There was tailings from mining operations. We had to level all those, and we had to seed the grass and plant wildflowers. And we had our stake up there all the time doing this stuff. It was great fun. So we were busy doing that, so we just didn't work on Martin's Cove. 1994 came, and President Hinckley called and asked if he could come to the Rock Creek dedication. I said, sure, you can not only come if you want, you can dedicate the thing. So he came in 1994, July 23rd, and after the dedication, there's a mob of people there. He grabbed me by the arm and he said, come with me. And he had me on one side of him and Dave Sayre on the other side. You know, so I'm walking with President over to his car. We get him in the car and close the door, and he rolled the window down about this far, and he looked right straight at me. He said, get in. It's the craziest thing that's ever happened to me. What do you mean, get in? He said, get in. I said, where are we going? He said, I'm going back to Salt Lake. I said, well, how am I going to get back here? He said, oh, we'll let you off on the road somewhere. And I said, yeah, but how do I get back? He said, just give your counselors your keys and have them follow us. So I threw my keys to my counselors. I said, I'm going with him. You guys follow me, and we'll see what happens. So we go down the road, and we talked about all kinds of things. Talked about my kids, talked about the weather, talked about Rock Creek, talked about the pioneers. Finally, the conversation turned to Martin's Cove. And the President said, how's the easement into Martin's Cove coming? I said, it's not doing very well at all. And I said, President Hinckley, I think we should just forget it. He sat up in his seat and he turned around and he looked at me and he said, I would believe that from anybody in the church, but not you. I said, well, I mean it with all my heart. You should just forget it. He said, why? I said, because since it's been in the church news so many times, every carload of Mormons that comes by wants to go to Martin's Cove. These guys are trying to earn a living. these carloads come by and say, we want to go to Martin's Cove, and they have to get off their horse or out from underneath their tractor or off their baler, or the Mormons leave the fences open and the bulls get in with the heifers and they spin their tires in the pasture. I said, it's a mess. We're causing a real problem for these people. And he said, man, he said, that is terrible. I said, yeah, we ought to just forget it. So he sat back down in his seat, and it got really, really quiet in the car. And I thought, man, they're just going to throw me out. And then I said, President, I got another idea if you want to hear it. And he said, what's that? I said, let's just buy the whole ranch. He sat up, turned around, looked at me, and said, I really don't believe you said that. I said, we need it. He said, what for? He said, why would we want a ranch in Wyoming? I said, President, you buy ranches in Wyoming all the time. He said, how do you know that? I said, because you just bought one in Ranchester. How do you know that? I never told him, but my senior high councilman was the lawyer that did all the work on it. And I said, well, you know, let's just buy the ranch. He said, how big is it? I said, I don't know. It's big. I said, but it'll be terrific. It's amazing how many people come there in the winter. They want to see what it was like in the winter. It's awesome in the winter. You can almost see them. You know, when you go in there and you're all alone, it's really something to be in there in the winter. Anyway, I said, it'd be open 12 months a year. I said, it'd be the only visitor center in the church that pay for itself, because it's not only a visitor center and a group of historical sites, it's a ranch. These people have made a living there since 1860. I said, it's great, let's do it. He said, you know, he said, I kind of like the way you're thinking. He says, you're authorized on behalf of the church to go buy that ranch. I said, wait a minute, not me. You know, send somebody else. I don't know how to buy a ranch. I don't know nothing about a ranch. He said, no, go ahead and do it. And told Dave to drop my brother Sarah to pull over to the side of the road, and they let me out on the side of the road. And he rolled the window down, he shook my hand, he said, good luck. He said, the only thing is that it's between you and me. He said, don't tell a lot of people what we're doing. He said, let me know how you're coming. I said, okay. So he drove off. And my counselors came and picked me up, and I guess I was a little pale about the color of my shirt. And President Kitchen said, what happened? I said, oh, nothing. He said, well, are we in trouble? And I said, you guys aren't in any trouble, but I'm in more trouble than you can imagine. He said, well, did something go wrong at the dedication or something? I said, no, everything went fine at the dedication, but I'm supposed to do something, and I can't tell you what it is I'm doing. How do you buy a ranch from somebody who doesn't want to sell it, who it's their family heirloom, you know? I mean, how do you do that? I didn't know how to do it, so I did the only thing I could do. I wore the carpet out next to my bed, praying about it. I prayed about it all the time. How do I do this? The prophets give me an assignment. How do I do this? It didn't take long, so I didn't really wear the carpet out. 2 weeks later, 2 weeks to the day, almost to the hour, I was at Martin's Cove. The Arvada, Colorado State had come up, and they asked me to speak to them, so I was over there speaking to them. Bernard's son, whenever he found out that I was on the property, he'd come tell me all the bad things the Mormons had done. You know, about the bulls with the heifers and all this stuff. And so I kind of hid every time I went over there, and Bernard always found me. This time Bernard knew I was out there, and you could always tell how mad Bernard was because how fast he was driving. He drives this old mustard-colored Jeep Wagoneer, and if he's driving fast, you know something's really bad wrong. He has this old cigar that hangs out of his mouth, and he chews it. He never smokes it, just chews it. And he's chewing on a cigar. He came roaring up, slammed on the brakes, rocks flying everywhere. He gets out. He's 80. At that time, I think he was 78. Gets out of the car. He's a pretty spry guy. He's a real Wyoming cowboy. He comes over to me, and he just pokes me in the chest. Just, boom. Hi, Bernard, you know. And I wanted to say, you know, those CES guys, I don't know anything about them. He said, you and me have got to have a talk, Scotty. And I said, what about? And he said, come with me. So we walked down the road. We met maybe a half a mile. Bernard didn't say a word, didn't say nothing, which wasn't unusual for Bernard because he doesn't talk much. But I looked over at him, and these big tears were coming down his face. His face looks like a piece of leather. I mean, he's just a real Wyoming cowboy. He's lived there all his life. Been out in the sun every day of his life, herding cows. And these tears were coming down his face, and my first thought was, oh my word, the guy's got cancer. He's dying or something. So I said, Bernard, what in the world's wrong? He said, the boys threw me out. I said, what boys threw you out? What are you talking about, Bernard? He said, I no longer am the president of Sun, Land, and Cattle as of last Friday. Do you know anyone who would like to buy this ranch? 14 days from the time the prophet told me to go buy. He wasn't the prophet then, but the President Hinckley. 14 days, the guy that owned and controlled the ranch came to me and asked me if I knew anybody who wanted to buy the ranch. I said, Bernard, I do. Let me get back to you. So I called President Hinckley. He couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. So President Hinckley got John Creer involved, who's over farm management, and John did a very, very good job. John did an excellent job of negotiating the purchase of the ranch. A lot of give and take went on. It took 1 year to divide the ranch. The family was having troubles between different sections of the family. Finally, Steve's son and Bernard's son decided to get in a room and flip a coin. And whoever won the coin toss got to decide how to draw the line or to pick first. I don't know who won the coin toss, but I know who drew the line. It was Bernard. Bernard couldn't have drawn that line better if he'd have been the Angel Moroni. He could have drawn that line east-west, northwest, east-west. He could have done a lot of things. 1,200,000 acres, you can do a lot of line drawing. Bernard put everything we wanted on one side of the line. It also is only 10% of the whole ranch, but it includes 90% of the deeded land and carries 60% of the cattle. It's the plum of the whole thing. I was there the day they did it. I wasn't in the room, but I was there. They came out of the room giggling. Dennis son did. He says, you'll never believe what happened. I said, no, what happened? He said, Bernard doesn't own what you want anymore. I said, who does? He said, Steve. I said, who is Steve's son? Nobody in the church knew Steve's son. He lived clear down by Rollins, and none of us knew him. All of a sudden, there's a new player in the game, and we were going to have to start all over again. How do you meet this guy now? Went back to my knees and started praying about it. My boss is a big entrepreneur. He loves to raise money for silly things like companies. And there's a guy from Long Island, New York that wanted to come out to Wyoming and build a buffalo herd, if you can believe that, out of scrap iron. And he wanted to put it out in the prairie and have it in the shape of a buffalo. And then these things would stand on one foot and pivot in the wind as they blew them, and they'd make groaning sounds like buffaloes. And it was going to be a new Mount Rushmore, you know. And my boss gets involved in this goofy thing, and since I'm the chief financial officer, wants me to raise the money for this guy to build this stupid buffalo herd. It's the dumbest thing I've ever heard of. But I'm flying back and forth to Long Island trying to raise this $15 million to build these dumb buffalo. And the guy can't find a piece of ground to put them on. So he hears about the Sun Ranch and goes and talks to Steve's son, unbeknownst to me. One day I come to work, and there's 3 guys in my office. One of them's the artist, the guy from New York. One of them's Dennis' son, who I know very well, and this other guy that I don't know. I go in, and Dennis' son stands up and says, I want you to meet my cousin, Steve. All of a sudden, the guy that we needed to meet to buy the ranch from is in my office in Riverton, Wyoming, 100 miles from his home. He's in my office, and I'm trying to raise money to build him a buffalo herd. It's crazy what was going on. The buffalo herd failed miserably. It was a wipeout. Never built the buffalo herd. But we became friends with Steve on a business basis. Started saying, Steve, what about, maybe want to sell this thing? Well, yeah, we'd consider it if the deal was right. Got John Creer involved again, started making the deal. It was going real good. December 1996 comes along, and I'm in New York again, on Wall Street, in a limousine, with nothing to do, waiting for a meeting. So I said, I'll call Steve and see how it's going. Called Steve's son. Steve, how's it going? Where are you? I'm in Wall Street in a limousine. You're not either. Yeah, I really am. How's the deal on the ranch? The deal's off. What do you mean the deal's off? You guys are pushing too hard a bargain. We're not going to sell. Ever. I said, Steve, wait a minute. We've all put in too much time. It's good for you, it's good for your family, and it's good for the church. He said, we're not selling. I said, Steve, what about the easement into Martin's Cove? He said, you will never own an easement across Sunland. Started to fly home that afternoon. We have a Citation jet. We're all pilots, and that day I was flying co-pilot. People don't like to fly with me because I don't navigate very well. So they don't let me be the pilot. You know, there's two kinds of ratings. There's VFR, which is visual flight rated, and IFR, which is instrument flight rated. That's what I am, but it doesn't stand for instrument flight rated. It stands for I follow roads. I can't navigate at all, and I get vertigo real bad. So they don't like me flying, but they let me fly co-pilot once in a while, and so I was flying co-pilot that day on the way back from New York, and we got out over Casper somewhere, and I asked the pilot if I could fly for a minute, and he said, sure. So I took our jet from about 43,000 feet down to about 600 feet above the ground, and we were doing about 360 miles an hour, and we buzzed Independence Rock, Devil's Gate, the Martin's Cove, the Sun Ranch, Split Rock, the Willie Rescue Site, Rocky Ridge, Rock Creek. And by the time I got that thing turned around, we were clear down at Pacific Springs. It took us 2.5 minutes. But as we flew by, thousands and thousands of memories just came to my memory of the Willie and the Martin people, of our people, of you, of the people who would come if we had that as an asset for the church. I've never written President Hinckley or any of the rest of them a letter unless they wrote me first, and I responded. That time, I broke that rule, and I wrote President a letter. It was a long letter. I told him why we had to have the ranch. I told him we had to somehow put the deal back together. We really needed the ranch. After he got it, he called me and he said, you know, you wax pretty eloquent when you get upset. I said, I'm not upset. We just need it. He said, go over and see if you can put it back together. I called Steve, met him at Muddy Gap, 7 o'clock in the morning. Figured I'd be there for a half an hour. I was there for 13. Steve asked me if I'd get in his truck. This was December 1976. So I got in his truck. We drove all over that ranch. Went to the top of the Ferris Haggerty Mountains, went clear back over to Savage Pocket, went all over everywhere. We talked and talked and talked. He said, we can't sell the ranch. I said, why? He said, I don't want you to think I'm nuts. He said, but sometimes when I'm out here, I hear voices. I said, you do? He said, it's not like you and me talking to each other. He said, but I hear a voice. I said, well, who is it? He said, I not only can tell you who it is, but I can tell you what he's saying. He said, it's my great-grandfather, Thomas Sun Sr. And he said, you know, he was kind of a mean guy. He hung cattle, Kate, and some other things. And he said, I don't want to get on the other side of the veil, or on the other side, he said, when I die, and have him mad at me. And he said, Tom Sun's telling me, don't you ever sell this ranch. It's our blood, sweat, and tears. It's our heritage. It's our home. And don't you ever sell it. He said, so I can't sell. So we drove some more. He said, there's other times that I hear hundreds of voices. I said, well, who are they? He said, it's no question about it. It's the Martin people. He said, they say they know my grandfather and that it's okay. that the church will take care of our name and preserve our heritage as well as your own. He said, is that true? And I said, Steve, as long as I'm alive and have anything to do with it, it will be the Sun Ranch. We will preserve your heritage if I have anything to say about it. Other times in the day, he said interesting things. I said, Steve, you know, we're looking at this as an investment. If I could show the church, I was thinking as an accountant, if I could show the church that we could make more money on it and we could get our investment back quicker, maybe that would help me sell the deal to the church. He said, you can't. I said, what do you mean I can't? He said, there's no alfalfa out here. I said, we've driven all day long, and I've not seen one alfalfa plant. He said, and you never will. I said, why? He said, every ranch out here has alfalfa. Why doesn't yours have alfalfa? It's a better cash crop. He said, you will never see one single plant of alfalfa on Sun land. I said, but why? He says, my great-grandfather. So what's your great-grandfather got to do with alfalfa? He said, before my great-grandfather died, he called my great-grandfather in and said, don't you ever plow this land. If you don't, you will never need to. I said, what does that mean, Steve? He said, this ranch supports 20% more cattle per acre than any ranch in the area. He said, because of the second thing my great-grandfather said. So what's that? He said to plow up the Mormon Trail would be sacrilegious. Don't you ever plow it up. So what you see there is what the pioneers saw. It hasn't changed a bit. Economics has not driven that ranch in the way that it's driven every other ranch. They've all had to convert to alfalfa, except Sunlands. And on Sunlands, there is only native grass. But yet it supports 20% more cattle than any ranch in central Wyoming. At the end of that day with Steve, or in the middle of the day, we were up on top of the Ferris Mountains. He asked me if I wanted something to drink. I said, Steve, I'd love something to drink. I didn't bring anything to eat or anything, and neither did he, because we thought we'd just not be able to make a deal. He got in the back of the truck, and he got in his cooler, and he got 2 cans of Coca-Cola, and he gave me one. And I know there's a debate that goes on in the church whether you should or you shouldn't, and I'm not here to debate that. There is one doctrine, though, that is unquestionable in the church, and that is you have to do what your mother tells you. And my mother taught me from the time I was a little boy to never drink cola drinks. And so I never have. I don't know what they taste like to this day. When he gave me that can of Coke, and I could see that it was cold, I was thirsty because I'd been talking a long time. I really, really wanted to drink that. But I didn't because of my mother. I set it in the seat next to me, and we finished the day. 13 hours from the time he picked me up, he let me out at Muddy Gap. As I got out of his big old truck, my coat slid across the seat, and the can of Coke had been covered up by my coat, and he saw the can of Coca-Cola sitting in the seat. And he said, hey, you didn't drink that Coke I gave you. I said, yeah, I know, I didn't. Most profound thing he said to me personally that day was what he said next. He said, good. I can trust you. You practice what you believe. And I don't know if that little 50-cent can of Coca-Cola had anything to do with anything. But 3 weeks later, the church owned the Sun Ranch and became steward of those lands. It's so big. When you're there, you can stand there, and everything you see, we own. You can have Girls Camp and Boy Scout camp there at the same time and not have any problems. They can't get to each other. It is huge. And we've become the stewards because of what happened there, and that's the sacrifice of the Martin people.